Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, June 19th, 2020, and today we're going to be taking a look at the discussion for Joe Biden's potential presidential choice that he's going to announce roughly, maybe a week or so before the convention, but it is very likely that Joe Biden does choose to announce it early. We've gotten very quickly into the general election season, the primaries ending in April, so I wouldn't be surprised if Joe Biden did announce the vice presidential choice early. Just in 2016 and years prior, it typically took very little time in order to between the convention and the vice presidential choice. I believe with Tim Kaine, it was somewhere around 2 weeks. I know that with some other VP choices, it was as late as 5 days before the convention that the VP choice was announced. So that actually might have been the case in 2008. So we have narrowed down the pretty much the overall list of candidates for the vice presidential spot down to 3 women, according to Fox Business, and actually 2 conflicting reports that are prevalent right now in the news. Fox Business reports that Joe Biden, the top Democrats are saying Joe Biden is stuck between Kamala Harris and Val Demings, while there's another report out that says Susan Rice and Kamala Harris are in the running. And I saw another one discussing Stacey Abrams, but she wasn't even discussed in the top 6 in the previous video, so I decided not to include her, considering the fact that that seemed very unlikely as a potential scenario. But again, I could be completely wrong. This is all speculative, and this is based off what's been leaked to the media. And while it may not necessarily be covered directly by CNN or MSNBC, I do think that it is important to talk about the leaks that are put out by top Democratic officials, because usually they end up to be true. So Kamala Harris, number one, her and Val Demings both have a history with the police department. Val Demings literally being a part of the police department in the past, and Kamala Harris, her history as a prosecutor is not going to be an attribute to her campaign. Yes, the Democratic Party usually lacks amongst voters that are supportive of the police force and that are very supportive of the United States military, and that's always been an area in which the Democratic Party hasn't had as strong of a grip in. Now, I think it's even going to be a lot worse. Now, that's not to say that they should choose a woman who had served in the police force, because that's by no means going to help Biden's campaign. In fact, I do think that'd be a hindrance. So Val Demings, while being from a state such as Florida, she does offer that regional advantage. She does offer, support in the South, in an area that typically votes Republican. I do think that her presence could very much help Joe Biden in states such as North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. But the problem is, she is very closely tied with the, police force. Amy Klobuchar removed herself from consideration for vice president, citing that she truly believes that a woman of color needs to be chosen. I think that's the main reason why Elizabeth Warren has not been mentioned by any of the reports from top Democratic officials. And I think a lot of it has to do, again, with optics. Joe Biden is an old white man, pretty much the same type of candidate that the Democrats have been putting up before Obama and Hillary Clinton. So he does need to offset that, especially with a woman of color, especially during this time period. We're talking about Black Lives Matter being a #1 issue. I think it would be actually foolish of the Biden campaign to choose a woman who isn't of color. More specifically, I think they should choose a Black woman. All 3 of these women on your screen, number 1, are very, very strong contenders for the vice presidential choice. I don't think that any of them are going to be, super hurtful to the Biden campaign. I do think that they do have a lot of attributes, but a lot of them do carry baggage. Kamala Harris carries baggage from her history as a prosecutor. Val Demings, again, with the police force, just showing her with a picture of that police uniform will not necessarily be beneficial to the Biden campaign. It'll continue and perpetuate the notion that Biden is the police type candidate, one that passed the crime bill. That's been an attack point for other Democrats. Susan Rice, she has a very close connection to the Obama White House. So all of these candidates, again, all VP choices will come inherently with some baggage. They all have done things at one point in time, but these are all very strong. They would all be very strong for Joe Biden. Again, they do have negative points, but they also have very positive ones. Choosing a woman of color will be very beneficial to the overall electoral map. The reason Hillary Clinton lost wasn't because necessarily she lost a number of white voters, which she did, but she also lost enthusiasm amongst minority voters. 59% Black turnout in 2016 compared to 66% in 2012 and 65% in 2008. In both of those elections, Barack Obama carried 330 or more electoral votes over his Republican opponent. In 2016, with a 7% decrease in Black turnout nationwide, Donald Trump was able to carry states that hadn't gone to the Republican Party in decades. States such as Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, which saw a huge decrease in turnout in Milwaukee, in Detroit, in Philadelphia. Even where the DNC was held in Pennsylvania, it wasn't enough to flip the state or at least retain the state in the Democratic column. While Val Demings does offer a regional advantage in the South, Kamala Harris also does not necessarily a regional advantage, but the fact that she is a woman of color. All of these candidates will inherently be very good choices because they can drive up minority turnout, whether that's in states such as Arizona or states such as Georgia or North Carolina or Florida or Michigan or Wisconsin or Pennsylvania. These states, or just a number of them, have a very, not necessarily large African-American population. That's true for some of these southern states, but they do have a force that typically votes for the Democratic Party and elects them to the presidency time and time again, or at least votes for them in the presidency. When Donald Trump broke through that blue wall in the states such as Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, it was a big deal. Number one, Hillary Clinton was supposed to absolutely decimate him in these states. They were not really supposed to be close. People were saying, what is Donald Trump doing in Michigan when he could be focusing on Florida? He's obviously not going to be competitive in Michigan. Just because he's putting an effort in it last minute doesn't mean that it's going to be competitive, and he ended up winning it. Same thing was said about Wisconsin. I think the only one that was really targeted by both campaigns from the get-go was Pennsylvania, and a lot of that had to do with the fact that, number one, Wisconsin was always polling negatively for Donald Trump. It was the only state outside of the margin of error that was wrong in 2016. Michigan, it wasn't supposed to be a Republican state either. Realistically, is a Democratic state, went to Obama by 17% in 2008. So the reason was a number of white voters flipping from Obama to Trump, but also the lack of black voters in these states. Now, it's not to say that it's somehow their fault for not voting. The Democratic Party put up a candidate that wouldn't necessarily excite them. And to be completely honest, Joe Biden does excite Democratic black voters as much as, Hillary Clinton did in terms of the primary performance. But while Joe Biden does improve amongst whiter voters, amongst every single voting demographic compared to Hillary Clinton, he still needs a woman of color in order to offset that. I think with Amy Klobuchar's retraction from the vice presidential race, I think that puts very good shot for Senator Kamala Harris and Val Demings and Susan Rice to be possibly Joe Biden's VP choice. The reason why I think, number one, Elizabeth Warren probably won't be considered, a lot of Bernie supporters have a negative viewpoint of her because she dropped out very late, and she a lot of them attribute to Bernie Sanders' loss. Other than that, it really doesn't matter that she's being completely taken out of the running. Based off the numbers, she would have been the best choice for Joe Biden as vice president, but he can very much win this campaign without her. I really think that it is time for a woman of color to be on the ticket, especially for the Democratic Party. If everything is just perception, absolutely choose a woman of color. And all of these women are 100% qualified. The problem with choosing someone such as Stacey Abrams was that she had no real political experience other than serving as a state senator from Georgia. The problem with choosing a prominent but not necessarily experienced official was the fact that Joe Biden says that his vice president needs to be ready day one. I think a lot of discussions about his health, which he has not personally taken on as an issue, or at least debated with or answered questions to a reporter about, but I think that's something in the back of the minds of a lot of these voters that are saying, well, will Joe Biden's vice presidential choice be able to take over for him? And I think that all of these women are experienced. But the problem, I think, for Susan Rice is that Val Demings and Kamala Harris have legislative experience. Val Demings, number one, she comes from a state such as Florida, so that's going to be a major attribute. Susan Rice offers no type of regional advantage. But when you take a look at her specifically, there will likely obviously be a special election. She will be giving up her seat. It'll be a 2-year term, and it's 1 out of 435 seats, so it's not super contested, but it does have the possibility of going to the Republican Party if there is a type of Massachusetts Senate type scenario. But we probably won't see that in California. We'll probably end up actually only having 2 Democrats on the ballot in California. So I think the problem with on top of other issues, Elizabeth Warren was from Massachusetts. Now, Massachusetts is a very Democratic state, always votes for the Democratic Party, but they do have a tendency of voting for the Republican Party when they are not necessarily too happy with a Democrat president. For example, Barack Obama in 2014, Massachusetts flipped to the Republican Party on the governor's race and then voted again for him, Charlie Baker, in 2018. In 2009 or 2010, there was that special election, which Scott Brown was elected to, ended up losing to Elizabeth Warren in the general election year, but in that special election, they brought out their, the Republican support and opposition from Democrats against President Barack Obama. So I think that was also in the back of the heads, especially going into the Senate elections where we very well could end up with a 50-50 Senate where the vice president breaks the tie every single time. That's something that they also need to worry about because we're talking about someone who's going to be in the White House, meaning they could very well either win re-election now or not be up for re-election, meaning they would have to resign their seat if elected, which gives the opportunity for the Republican Party to target that seat and try to make a pickup. Susan Rice, while not vacating a certain office, I wouldn't necessarily say that she's probably going to be the strongest candidate. Sure, her name is fairly recognizable, but Kamala Harris is a former 2020 presidential hopeful. In fact, she peaked at second place nationwide. I think the fact that Kamala Harris started her campaign attacking Joe Biden could be hurtful for her, but also beneficial because she made a name for herself by attacking the vice president. If someone like her is able to come around and support him, that also would appease a lot of voters who were sure, most Kamala Harris supporters have already flocked over to Joe Biden, and at this point, obviously, the primary is over. But it is important to note that she could very well offer solutions to the things that she saw wrong with Joe Biden as the potential nominee, and I think a lot of Americans would necessarily appreciate that, especially coming from someone who serves as a senator. The whole issue is that we're all talking about I think the issue with a lot of these other female choices for Joe Biden is the fact that a lot of them aren't women of color. Yes, there are qualified women such as Elizabeth Warren, and this wouldn't have been a good choice, but Amy Klobuchar, among many other women that very well could have been chosen. But the the Democratic Party is focused a lot about change. They're focused a lot about something different necessarily, electing the first black president, trying to elect the first female president, and now making a commitment back in April to have the first female vice president if elected, or March. So when you think about that, the Democratic Party is going to try to choose someone who could offset the ticket, who could bring in a new type of voter. And frankly, I don't see that happening with someone like Elizabeth Warren at a face value point. Her policies and her ability to win over progressive voters, I think, is a very strong viewpoint. But these people are already expected to go to the Democratic Party. Minority voters at this point in time are going to be a very big part of the 2020 election. And if they don't feel adequately represented in the Biden ticket, they may not end up voting for him. The same thing they did for Hillary Clinton. She chose Tim Kaine. Can you find someone more boring? Being completely honest. Tim Kaine, fine guy on his own, fine senator, whatever it might be, but he should not have been the VP choice in 2016. She overestimated her support amongst white working class voters and amongst minority voters in terms of turnout. The Democratic Party thought there was no way that they didn't vote because Donald Trump was in their mind such a horrible candidate. Well, he ended up winning, and now the Democratic Party is starting to do, recount a lot of their mistakes from 2016 and trying to drive up turnout. Georgia saw more Democrats vote than Republicans. It didn't happen in 2016. In Wisconsin's Supreme Court election, that special election, the Republican Party narrowed down the polling stations from 180 in Milwaukee down to 5, and the Democrats still ended up victorious. Even though it's a nonpartisan race, we all know which party represents who. So obviously, a number of things are happening nationwide that are all benefiting the Democratic Party. And I think a lot of it is going to be focused on for the 2020 election. And I think now is the time for Joe Biden to choose a woman of color, even though it may just be optics, whatever it might be. I think that it is truly important for the progression of minority voters supporting the Democratic Party for such a long period of time to be accurately represented in the White House, to have someone who shares the same skin tone as them, to have someone who can advocate with personal experiences on their side. Kamala Harris is not African American, by the way. She is, I'm not entirely sure of her national. I believe she is Jamaican, but I believe she's also mixed. I know for a fact she's not African American, though, so I do accidentally refer to her sometimes as that. A lot of people do because they refrain from using the word black, but again, they are different distinctions in this situation because, again, she literally isn't African American. So that's why I'm using the term women of color as well. And I will say that Joe Biden is probably going to choose Kamala Harris. I think that out of these three, I truly believe Kamala Harris is the best pick for her. Val Deming's history is, I would say, probably worse than Kamala Harris. Yes, Kamala Harris has attacked Joe Biden on numerous occasions, but that could all just be dispelled with a simple, that was the primary. That's how it goes. Elizabeth Warren attacked him. All these candidates attacked him. Now they're all supporting him. So that's how a general primary goes. You can take all those Republican names, which they are, and saying that all these Republicans attacked Donald Trump in 2016. I mean, literally, his press secretary said that he was, an embarrassment to the GOP. His current press secretary said that 5 years ago. So, yes, words can be twisted and used against the nominee, but everyone knows that during a primary season, anything really goes. So I don't necessarily think Kamala Harris is debate comments will be one of her major hindrances. I think that, yes, her history as a prosecutor and Val Deming's history with the police department could be baggage on her. Same way with Susan Rice with the Obama administration. There's so many things that could be considered baggage, but also all of these candidates have attributes that are very helpful to the Biden campaign as well. So I will say that if it is down to these three, I think Joe Biden has chosen very qualified women. But I will say that Kamala Harris will probably be the best in terms of increasing his chances at winning the election in 2020. And no, that is not just because I chose her as the VP choice back in 2017. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe if you haven't already. Please consider joining as a member on my channel. Make sure to go ahead and look out for the new subscriber decided Senate election night. That will be released sometime tomorrow. I'll release that poll. Go ahead and check out my Instagram at Let's Talk Elect and my Twitter, LT Elections. There's no extra E. That's pretty much it. You'll see I literally am trying out this new end screen, so tell me if you guys like it or not. And that's pretty much it. Again, thank you all for watching this video, and I will see you all tomorrow.